He was dying, and he knew it. On the tiny volcanic island of Saint Helena, in a damp, crumbling room that smelled of mildew and rotting wood, the man who had once commanded the fate of Europe lay curled in agony. His stomach was on fire. His legs had swollen to twice their normal size. He vomited through the night, again and again, shaking with convulsions that no physician could explain. Outside, British soldiers patrolled the perimeter. No one was allowed in or out without written permission. And here, in this prison disguised as a house, Napoleon Bonaparte was fading. But the greatest mystery was not that he died. The greatest mystery is what, or who, killed him. Because the official story France told the world for nearly 2 centuries was a lie. It begins not at the end, but with the fall. By 1815, Napoleon had already lost everything once and clawed it back. His 100 days return from exile had ended in catastrophe at Waterloo on June 18, 1815. The British, Prussians, Dutch, and their allies had crushed him in what became one of the most decisive battles in human history. Within weeks, he surrendered to Captain Frederick Maitland aboard HMS Bellerophon, believing the British would treat him as a guest, perhaps even allow him to retire quietly in England. He was wrong. The British government wanted him gone, permanently, irreversibly gone from European politics. So they sent him to the most remote, inhabited place they could find on the map of the world. Saint Helena, a speck of volcanic rock in the South Atlantic Ocean, nearly 2,000 kilometers from the west coast of Africa. He arrived there on October 15, 1815. He would never leave. The island was everything Paris was not. There was no grandeur, no marble, no golden light reflecting off the Seine. There was wind, fog, red clay cliffs, and a gray sky that seemed to press down on everything. Napoleon was installed in Longwood House, a converted barn that leaked when it rained and collected moisture inside the walls. The British governor of Saint Helena, Sir Hudson Lowe, was a man Napoleon despised from their first meeting. Lowe was petty, suspicious, and obsessive. He cut Napoleon's budget. He restricted the number of visitors. He intercepted letters. He even argued over what title Napoleon should be called. Lowe refused to call him emperor, insisting on General Bonaparte, which Napoleon considered a deliberate humiliation. These were not small irritations. They were, Napoleon would later say, assassinations by committee. Slow, deliberate, bureaucratic cruelties designed to break a man's spirit before his body gave out. Napoleon spent his years on Saint Helena dictating his memoirs, walking the grounds when his health allowed, and receiving the small circle of loyalists who had followed him into exile. Among them was General Henri Bertrand, his faithful chief of staff, Emmanuel de Las Cases, his devoted secretary who secretly smuggled letters off the island, Count Charles de Montholon and his wife, who lived with Napoleon for the duration of his exile, and Louis Marchand, his personal valet, whose diary would become one of the most important historical documents of the 19th century. These people watched Napoleon deteriorate in real time. The man who had crossed the Alps, who had stood on the battlefield of Austerlitz as cannon fire shook the earth, was now struggling to walk to the garden. By early 1821, he was bedridden. His doctors, first Barry O'Mara, then Francesco Anamarchi, noted an alarming collection of symptoms: severe abdominal pain, persistent nausea, swollen legs, a tender liver, extreme fatigue, pale skin, sensitivity to light, an inability to hold down food. On April 15, 1821, Napoleon dictated his final will. He knew the end was coming. He told those around him he was being murdered, but not with a sword. On May 5, 1821, at approximately 5:49 in the evening, Napoleon Bonaparte died. He was 51 years old. The official cause of death, according to the British-approved autopsy, was stomach cancer. And for 130 years, that was the story the world believed. Then came the bombshell that changed everything. In 1960, a Swedish dentist named Sten Forshoffud picked up a copy of Louis Marchand's recently published diary and began reading it with the eyes of scientist rather than a historian. Forshoffud was not a Napoleon scholar. He was a toxicologist. And as he read Marchand's meticulous descriptions of Napoleon's final months, his blood ran cold. The symptoms Marchand described were not those of stomach cancer. They were, point by point, symptom by symptom, the textbook presentation of chronic arsenic poisoning. Forchevud contacted a British forensic expert, Hamilton Smith, and together they obtained strands of Napoleon's hair that had been cut and preserved immediately after his death, a common 19th century memorial practice. They sent the hair to a nuclear reactor facility in Glasgow for neutron activation analysis, the most precise method available for detecting trace elements. The results came back in 1961. Napoleon's hair contained arsenic levels more than 13 times higher than what is considered normal. 13 times. This was not environmental contamination. This was not accidental. Someone had been poisoning Napoleon Bonaparte over an extended period of time. The question that has haunted historians ever since is not whether he was poisoned. That part, most serious researchers now accept. The question is who did it and why. And here is where the story fractures into something genuinely disturbing. Because the list of suspects is short, and every name on it was someone Napoleon trusted completely. Count Charles de Montholon sits at the top of that list. He was one of Napoleon's closest companions at Longwood. He controlled much of the household, including the wine supply. And arsenic, in the early 19th century, was routinely dissolved in wine as a way to administer it slowly without detection. Montholon had access, opportunity, and motive. Historians have uncovered evidence suggesting Montholon maintained secret correspondence with the Comte d'Artois, the ultra-royalist brother of King Louis XVIII, the man who would become Charles X of France. If Napoleon died in exile without a dramatic martyr's exit, the Bourbon Restoration was safe. If Napoleon somehow survived long enough to return to France one more time, and he was only 51, not an old man, the Bourbon throne could crumble overnight. Montholon may have been a royalist spy living inside Napoleon's household from the very beginning. But the story gets even darker, because French government archives, partially declassified in the late 20th century, have revealed that French officials in the early 19th century were acutely aware of rumors surrounding Napoleon's death and actively worked to suppress them. The official stomach cancer narrative served a political purpose. A Napoleon who died of natural causes was a Napoleon who could be slowly rehabilitated into a romantic, harmless legend. A Napoleon who was murdered by a royalist conspiracy was a Napoleon who became a martyr, and martyrs inspire revolutions. France had already had enough of those. So the cancer story was not just the British-approved conclusion. It was a politically convenient truth adopted by multiple governments with multiple reasons to keep the real story buried. There's a further dimension that most documentaries leave out entirely. In the 1990s, hair samples from Napoleon were retested using even more advanced spectrometry. The results confirmed Forchevud's findings, but they also revealed something new. The arsenic spikes in Napoleon's hair were not constant. They were episodic, appearing in waves, consistent with doses being administered at intervals rather than continuous low-level exposure from, say, the green arsenic-laced wallpaper found in Longwood House. The wallpaper theory, which briefly gained popularity in the 1980s, had suggested that mold in the damp walls could convert arsenic pigments in the wallpaper into toxic vapor. It was a compelling alternative explanation. But episodic dosing patterns do not come from wallpaper. They come from someone with a plan. Napoleon himself suspected something in his final days. On April 24, 1821, less than 2 weeks before his death, he reportedly said to Anna Markey, "I am dying before my time, murdered by the English oligarchy and its hired assassins." He was half right. The English oligarchy certainly wanted him dead. But the hired assassin, if Montholon was indeed the man, was already living under his roof, pouring his wine, sharing his table, watching him die from the inside. In his will, Napoleon left Montholon a sum equivalent to approximately 2 million euros in today's money. Even in death, he did not suspect the one person who, according to the most credible forensic evidence, had been killing him all along. The body of Napoleon was exhumed in 1840, nearly 20 years after his death, when France finally agreed to return his remains to Paris for burial in Les Invalides, the grand military tomb that still draws hundreds of thousands of visitors every year. Those who opened the original coffin reported something extraordinary. Napoleon's body was almost perfectly preserved. His features were recognizable. His uniform was intact. In ordinary decomposition, a body buried for 19 years would be skeletal. Arsenic, however, is a powerful preservative. His own poison had mummified him. He arrived in Paris looking, witnesses said, almost as if he were sleeping. The city that had twice exiled him wept in the streets as his coffin passed. They called it the return of the ashes. What they were really welcoming home was a body saturated with the evidence of its own murder, and no one asked a single question. The tomb at Les Invalides is one of the most visited monuments in France. Tourists stand at the railing above the massive red porphyry sarcophagus and look down in silence. What they do not know, what the plaques do not say, is that inside that magnificent coffin lies a man whose death has never been officially investigated as a homicide. No one has ever been charged. No government has ever formally reopened the case. The French state, for 200 years, has maintained the cancer story with quiet, bureaucratic persistence. The forensic evidence sits in academic journals. The hair samples are preserved in museums. The archived letters hinting at Montholon's royalist connections have been catalogued and shelved. Everything is known. Nothing has been done. And maybe that is the most haunting truth of all. Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who rewrote the laws of Europe, who placed his brothers on foreign thrones, who marched an army to the gates of Moscow, was defeated not on a battlefield, but in a dining room, by a man he trusted, in a house he hated, on an island he could not escape. And a world that once trembled at his name decided, very quietly, that it preferred the cleaner story. Some men are too dangerous to kill openly. So history kills them twice, once with poison and once with silence.